for goodness sake, dang! I need my dang! 1 second,
My name is Allara. I'm 33 years old, a data scientist who believes in clean inputs, defensible models, and the quiet safety of numbers that tell the truth. At 7 a.m. on a Sunday, in the same guest room where I kept a jar of glow-in-the-dark stars when I was 10, I woke to the sound of my phone, convulsing itself across the nightstand. Not one buzz, many, the kind of emergency rhythm that trains your heart to sprint before your brain knows why. I reached for it, bleary-eyed, expecting something ordinary and solvable. A coffee charge, a calendar ping, an investor reminder. Instead, the screen showed what felt like a medical diagnosis delivered without anesthesia. A flood of transaction alerts stacked like falling dominoes. I opened my business account, the one I treated like an incubator for a fragile life. Yesterday it was strong, Nangni $2,000 strong, the seed fund for my company's next step. Today it gasped back at me, 97th of 97s. It's strange what your body remembers when language fails. I remember the taste in my mouth, the acid shock of bad orange juice, the way the curtains in my childhood home made a pale rectangle on the carpet. The smell of last night's barbecue drifted in from the kitchen, sweet and heavy, like it belonged to someone else's house. I closed the app, force quit, reopened. My model didn't change. The number held steady, a flat line on a small blue screen. Somewhere between the second and third alert, I learned that grief can arrive as a math problem. 8 large transfers between 2000 and 4 a.m. Authorized from an unknown device that apparently knew me better than I knew myself. The room had the same furniture I recognized from grade school, only older. A chipped desk, the guest lamp with its fraying cord, the family's old laptop perched politely as if it had manners. I looked at it and saw hindsight sharpen into focus, the way a lens clicks from blur to clarity. Last night, at Mom's 50th, Dad had stopped the room like a stagehand pulling the house lights. The slideshow won't load, the baby pictures are stuck, the Wi-Fi is acting up. You're the tech wizard, sweetheart, please. He had pressed his palm to his chest, an actor at curtain call. Mom had leaned in, eyes bright with hope and wine and the story of us. I had sat at that ancient laptop, typed and authenticated, logged into my personal email for a license key, then into my company drive for a tool, all muscle memory, all good daughter reflexes. I didn't know then that keys were leaving my hands like confetti, that the machine was the magician's top hat, and I was the rabbit who climbed in voluntarily. The bank held me in a loop of hold music. When the representative answered, her voice was crisp, a clean white blouse. Yes, Ms. Allara, we see several large wire transfers. The password was correct. The 2-factor code was approved on the registered device. The IP address is your current location. The words slid across the desk and landed like small, sharp objects. I thanked her, hung up, and watched my reflection in the laptop's black screen. My face steady, the kind of steady that comes when you're standing on a bridge and can feel the tautness of cables you never noticed before. Panic didn't disappear. It calcified into something colder. I want to say I ran downstairs and screamed. That would be normal. That would be the scene most families train you to play. Accusation, denial, tears in the kitchen, an orbit of blame that returns you right back to your starting point, exhausted and still lost. But the truth is, I thought about patterns. Data scientists love patterns and fear them in equal measure. Because once you see the pattern, you can never unknow it. There had been a pattern since I was 10, and my grandfather's leather-bound astronomy textbook, my favorite thing, vanished to become someone else's $50. The pattern was the same at 15 and 20 and 30. The big dream, the noble pitch, the tiny betrayal disguised as a family favor. In polite families, we call it borrowing. In honest families, we call it theft. The average American adult has less than $500 in emergency savings. That's the statistic I once quoted to my team when we designed our model for small business risk. I never thought I'd cite it to myself in my parents' hallway, but there it was. We tell daughters to be generous and sons to be brave. We do not often tell parents to respect boundaries their children build with their own hands. I had built mine brick by brick, 3 jobs through grad school, long nights optimizing code, years of living like a student while friends drove cars that could valet themselves. That $92,000 wasn't confetti. It was payroll runway. The faith of 2 angel investors who wrote checks with their names on them and trusted mine in return. I put the phone down and made a list in my head. Evidence preserved, devices isolated, timeline noted, emails exported. If grief is a wave, documentation is a life raft. I packed my laptop and charger, folded my pajamas with the pointless neatness you develop when you need control. From the kitchen came the bright, ordinary sound of breakfast. A spatula against a pan, a laugh, a radio ad about truck tires. Blood is thicker than water, people say, as if it's an argument for forgiveness. But the truth is simpler and harder. Blood is just harder to wash out of clothing. I walked downstairs. Dad, Arthur, was at the counter, pouring coffee into a mug from a festival we never attended. He looked up with that beaming pride he wears like a rented suit. "Morning, kiddo," he said. "Sleep okay? Big day? We'll get that slideshow perfect before everyone arrives for the brunch. Your mother will cry." He spoke the last word like a prize he could win on her behalf. "Dad," I said, and it was astonishing how calm my voice sounded, as if I were explaining a bug report. "My business account is empty." He blinked, then did the thing he always does when truth lands in the room. He made space for a better story. He lifted his shoulders in a small shrug, a gesture that could pass for apology if you didn't listen to the words. "It was just sitting there," he said. "We had an opportunity. People who take from you rarely say, 'I took.' They say it needed to be done. They say for the family. They say you'll understand when you have kids. They put a frame around robbery and call it art. They hold up your heart and diagnose it as selfishness for beating on its own." In that moment, I understood something I had tried not to see for 23 years. In his mind, my life was not separate from his. My work was a pipeline that fed his version of the future. He was the architect of dreams, and I was the lumberyard. His opportunities were always live-action moral tests, and any answer other than yes was a betrayal. The vocabulary was familiar: obligation, loyalty, family, and the bill always arrived with my name on it. I didn't argue. You can't debug a person who doesn't believe there's an error. In every family like mine, there is a script. You raise your voice, they raise their grievance. History walks into the room uninvited and kicks over the furniture. I chose a different method. I gathered data. I noted the time. I walked outside, sat in my car under a tree at the end of the street, and made 2 calls. The first to my brother, Evan, who sounded confused and newly awake. The second to my aunt, Valerie, who never confused kindness with denial. "Don't you dare cry," she said, and it landed not as cruelty but as a seatbelt snapping into place. "This isn't a family disagreement, it's felony wire fraud. Meet me in 10. Bring the laptop." There's a lie we repeat to each other because it keeps the peace at holidays, that love excuses harm if the harm is committed by kin. It doesn't. Love is a choice and a boundary at the same time. I put the car into drive and watched the house recede in the rearview mirror. Its big new windows catching the Texas sun like eyes suddenly too bright. I had spent years learning to model risk in markets. That morning, I learned how to model risk in bloodlines. And as I turned onto the highway, I made myself a promise I could test and measure. I would stop being the resource. I would stop being the lumber yard. I would start being the architect of my own roof. What happened next? Lawyers. Evidence. A reckoning no one believed would really happen until it did. But before all of that, there was the clean, cold decision that changed everything. I would not argue in the kitchen. I would build a case. I would trust what the numbers told me about the people I loved. And I would follow the math all the way to the truth. If you map a life like a data set, you start to see. The outliers aren't accidents, they're signatures. My father's signature was performance. Arthur could turn a backyard into a stage with nothing but a spatula and a story. He had a preacher's cadence without a church, a salesman's smile without a product. Neighbors would drift to our fence line like moths to a porch light. Uncles from the block he'd known since high school. Men from the shop who smelled like motor oil and sunburn. A rotating cast of people who clapped at ambition and never asked for receipts. He'd talk about the next big thing. A refurbished car lot with guaranteed margins. A novelty grill business that would own Memorial Day. A boutique consultancy advising tech founders, even though he'd never shipped a single line of code. The air around him vibrated with the future. Always near enough to touch, never close enough to hold. My mother, Brenda, supplied the lighting for that stage. She didn't improvise, she harmonized. If Arthur said the contract was coming Tuesday, she set the table like Tuesday was Christmas. If he said an investor was flying down, she fluffed the couch pillows and baked a peach cobbler that could make you forgive a hurricane. She had a way of softening corners. "Your father tries," she'd say, eyes shining with a loyalty I used to mistake for love's strongest form. And that's how a pattern stabilizes. One person writes the myth. Another wraps it in warmth until your objection feels like cruelty. The first time I felt the pattern knot itself inside me, I was 10. My grandfather, my mother's father, gave me a leather-bound astronomy textbook, the kind you find in quiet sections of old libraries that smell like paper and rain. It was heavy, oversized, edged in gold leaf, with star charts so detailed they made you feel like the night sky had a blueprint. On the inside cover, in careful block letters, he wrote, "For Allara, who will go farther than I ever did." I slept with it under my pillow as if the weight of it could press confidence into the thin places of a child's skull. A week later, it vanished. I searched the whole house with a panic that made everything look slightly wrong. The lamp too bright, the hallway too narrow, my own reflection too suspicious. When I asked Dad if he had seen it, he did that breezy shrug, the rehearsal of innocence. I just needed to show it to an investor, he said, smoke curling from the cigarette. He wasn't supposed to be smoking. He was very impressed. Sweetheart, he always added that word like a ribbon on a borrowed package. I wanted to believe him. 10-year-olds want to believe. They're built for it. But truth sheds breadcrumbs. 2 days later, reaching into his coat for a quarter at the corner store, I found the pawn ticket, $50. The man behind the counter glanced at me and then at Arthur, and a small silence opened, the kind where adults think children don't hear the world deciding who they'll be. He sold my telescope of paper and ink for a pair of green bills and some change, converted a universe into gas money. I remember walking home in the hot seam of Texas afternoon, the ticket paper cutting my palm, and realizing there are names we give to theft to keep the peace. We call it borrowing, we call it sharing, we call it family. You don't usually get one giant betrayal. You get 1,000 small ones that learn to hold hands. At 12, he borrowed the first place robotics kit my team won so he could teach a neighborhood workshop. It never came back. At 14, the birthday money from 3 aunts went toward groceries this month because everybody eats your cake. At 16, he took the old laptop I used to write code and lent it to a friend at the shop who was never named and never returned the thing my fingers had taught to be mine. There was always a speech to wrap the taking, a moral costume for a practical violation. In those speeches, my objections were not logistical, they were disloyal. Brenda's role wasn't silence, it was translation. He didn't mean it like that, she'd say, standing too close to the stove, stirring macaroni like it required prayer. He's trying to build something for us. If I cried, she dabbed my tears with the hem of her t-shirt, as if water were an error that could be mopped from a child's face. She wasn't blind. She was fluent in a language where hope is a currency you spend even when the account is overdrawn. And once you learn that language, every statement of boundary sounds like a foreign insult. People like to quote lines about generational curses as if they are dramatic lightning bolts that split family trees. Most of the time, they're much quieter. They sound like, "Be patient, he's under pressure." They look like, "We'll replace it when the deal closes." They taste like peach cobbler on a Tuesday night, while the overdue bills live under a ceramic rooster on the kitchen counter. In the U.S., nearly half of adults can't cover a $1,000 emergency with savings. In families like mine, the emergency becomes a person you can borrow from. And if that person is a daughter who studies late and gets scholarships and knows how to make numbers behave, the emergency is conveniently renewable. So I made a counter language, little acts of resistance disguised as ambition. I joined the school's coding club and stayed after hours because algorithms felt like truth in a house that rewarded performance. I learned to love proofs in geometry because they forced you to earn every inch of certainty. I kept a hidden ledger, yes, literally, in a composition notebook where I logged every borrow, every promise of return, every date the promise drifted off, like a balloon you pretend not to want back. It wasn't to use against them. It was to convince myself I wasn't crazy, that the pattern was real, that I wasn't a bad daughter for noticing math where other people claimed there was only love. At 17, the ledger turned into a plan. UT Austin offered me a full ride, and I accepted with the hunger of someone who has watched their favorite stars pawned for $50. I picked up shifts: campus library, coffee shop, research assistant. I learned the quiet ecstasy of closing a bank app and seeing the number go up penny by penny without anyone's hand in my pocket. When other freshmen bought hoodies at full price, I hunted sales and cooked rice in a communal kitchen that smelled like 10 countries and survival. I visited home, but I drew small, invisible fences around what I brought with me. Laptop didn't leave my bag. Wallet stayed zipped. I smiled at speeches, hugged the hugs, and left before the car keys could become a moral object. People ask, gently, why I didn't cut contact sooner. Because boundaries formed in a fire aren't perfect lines, they're heat maps. There were good nights. Brenda and I dancing while cupcakes cooled. Arthur whispering a real apology at my graduation. Eyes wet with something that might have been truth. You bank those moments foolishly, like they'll earn interest. You convince yourself the pattern is breaking because your heart wants a trend line that points up. But the blueprint of manipulation doesn't change because you do well. It changes because you stop supplying material. When I graduated and got my first real paycheck, the requests sharpened, carved to look like opportunities. Short-term bridge, family rate, you'll get equity in the business, help me help us. I loaned $8,000 once, my largest mistake, and watched it vanish into the fog of cost overruns and supplier delays. When I asked for a payment plan, I became ungrateful. When I set a deadline, I became cold. The role each of us was supposed to play had never allowed for my growth. It only scaled the extractive logic. The more you have, the more we can call it love to take it. So I wrote a new contract, unspoken, signed only by me. 3 years before the birthday party, I said no more money. No more extracting my future to furnish a fantasy. The monthly calls slowed to seasonal guilt. The sugar in Brenda's voice thickened into something that could stick your feet to the kitchen floor. But underneath the silence, I felt something other than fear. I felt the first bricks of a wall that could hold. I didn't know then how elegantly they'd try to climb it, how they'd wrap the climb in nostalgia and confetti, how the bait would be memory, baby photos, a slideshow, the story of us cast in sepia. I didn't know the keylogger had already been purchased, that the old laptop had already been dressed up as a damsel in distress so I could rescue it with my passwords. But I did know this. The pattern had trained me in a way that would save me. When the money disappeared, I would not perform the kitchen drama. I would not plead or threaten or monologue. I would do what I had always done in the quiet. I would gather facts, follow the timestamps, draw the line from cause to effect, and choose a consequence sturdy enough to hold my life. On the night of Brenda's 50th, as Arthur raised a toast to family, I watched the room like a scientist watches a reaction. She's run 100 times. Laughter rose, glasses clinked. Someone shouted, "Speech!" He beamed beneath the chandelier, a man lit from below by his own legend. And in that glow, I felt the cool steadiness of knowing my role had changed. I was no longer the resource, no longer the daughter drafted into the supply chain of someone else's myth. I was the witness, I was the recorder. I was the person who would, at last, name the thing for what it was. In families like mine, truth is the only instrument that doesn't go out of tune. It's not as loud as a speech or as sweet as a cobbler, but it holds a note the room can't ignore forever. I tucked that note into my chest, next to the ledger and the child who loved star charts, and I promised her, even if I had to do it alone, I would get her book back in another form. Not paper and gold leaf, but a life that could finally point to a sky and say with proof, "These are the coordinates, this is the map, and I will not sell it." Independence didn't arrive like a parade. It arrived like a spreadsheet that finally balanced. In the years after UT Austin, I built my life the way I built models. Define the objective, constrain the noise, iterate until the loss function refuses to go lower. I took the job that paid less up front because the data set was richer. Small startup, thin resources, real problems. I learned where code breaks when it meets the world, how theoretical ON feels at 2 a.m. when an API throttles your requests and the client demo is at 9. I learned to read contracts the way I read logs, slowly, twice, with a pencil, circling the parts that pretended to be friendly while quietly shifting all risk onto the person eager for a chance. I built a ritual around paydays that felt almost sacred. Rent first, savings second, everything else after. My friends called it obsessive. I called it oxygen. When I got promoted, I didn't level up my lifestyle. I leveled up my buffer. 3 months runway became 6. 6 became 9. In a country where one emergency can turn a person into a statistic, a cushion isn't luxury, it's a refusal to be drafted into someone else's crisis. I lived in a 1-bedroom with a view of a parking lot that became beautiful at dusk when taillights braided themselves into a red necklace. I bought my groceries like I was stocking a lab, intentionally, not emotionally. I learned to cook lentils 5 ways, not because I love lentils, but because they are a form of quiet wealth. Protein that doesn't care about your mood. The first startup taught me how brittle optimism breaks. The second taught me how resilient realism bends without snapping. At 27, I led a team of 3. At 29, I secured a small grant to prototype a tool that predicted cash flow cliffs for small businesses. A kind of early warning siren for the corner baker who doesn't know her flour invoice is the butterfly wing that will become a hurricane in 8 weeks. The models worked. The pilot saved owners from avoidable pain. We called it Kepler because it turned noise into orbit. Somewhere in those years, a kind of peace settled in my body. Not the soft kind that makes you complacent, the tensile kind that makes you brave. I dated. I said no when a partner wanted to be impressed more than he wanted to know me. I said yes to a Saturday morning running club and a Sunday night book club, and on really good weeks, 1 soft serve cone, eaten while walking by the river in silence. I built a small life with a large internal volume. I measured success not in square footage, but in the number of mornings I woke up and didn't have to explain myself to anyone. And then, one afternoon, I got a text from Arthur. "Proud of you, kiddo. Big idea brewing. Can we talk?" Pride from him always arrived holding a second object behind its back. We spoke. He said words that should have been retired by then. Bridge, opportunity, family, just for a week. I'll pay interest. He wanted $8,000. It was for a supplier who'd been burned by banks, for inventory that was already promised, for a partnership that would change how folks around here build. If you stacked his sentences just right, you could almost see the future he narrated inside them, gleaming like a catalog version of a life. I lent him the money. I will not forgive myself completely, but I understand the math I did that day. I calculated the hope of being seen as a daughter the way I wanted to be seen, and I rounded up. I signed an agreement I wrote in plain English with dates and amounts and the sentence, "No further loans will be requested until this one is repaid." He signed it. Brenda made cookies as if sugar could notarize, and I left their house feeling the way a sky feels before hail, tense, bright, lying. The first payment date passed, then the second, then the third. Explanations came in slick clothes: supplier delay, family emergency, wire transfer glitch, next Tuesday for sure. In the fourth month, when I sent a firm but kind reminder with a revised plan, the response arrived edged with rust. "I didn't raise you to be this cold." The pivot was complete. I was no longer helpful. I was hard-hearted. The debt, like so many debts in our house, was no longer a number. It was my moral failing to care. That was the day I learned a boundary is not a wish, it is a system. I stopped replying to explanations and started logging them. I forwarded every text to a folder titled Ledger Arthur. I canceled holidays that required me to bring a casserole and leave with a hole in my wallet. I reduced my contact with Brenda to messages that didn't mention money, because money was a trap door that dropped you into a performance you couldn't win. It was brutal, and it was the cleanest air I had breathed in years. The guilt lasted a season. The relief lasted longer. Work filled the space where negotiation used to be. I sharpened my founder pitch. Not the version that flatters, the version that tells the truth and still asks for faith. 2 angel investors said yes to Kepler. They were practical, inquisitive people who had sat where I sat and remembered the taste of the risk. Their checks didn't feel like confetti. They felt like a key to a lab I had been building in my head for 5 years. I opened a separate business account. I drafted a finance policy for a company that had 3 people and 2 laptops, because I wanted the bones to be strong before the muscle arrived. I created an emergency protocol for compromised credentials, wrote it in clear steps, and stuck it to the inside of my desk drawer, a little charm against the chaos I no longer allowed through my door. When I told my parents that I had launched, there was a pause. Not a bad pause. One of those spaces where people decide which mask to wear. Then came the flood. Brenda's voice turned honeyed with pride. Arthur's turned loud with belonging. Our daughter, the CEO, he told a neighbor on speakerphone, as if the letterhead had his surname embossed into the paper stock. The monthly calls returned as seasonal celebrations. He asked thoughtful questions about investors and burn rate, and I tried not to count the seconds until family opportunity arrived in the conversation. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes he just wanted to bask in the halo that proximity to my work gave him. I let him. Proximity is free. Access is not. 3 years after the $8,000, an invitation arrived in the mail that smelled like a florist and looked like a mortgage. Brenda's 50th birthday celebration, casual elegance, RSVP requested with a calligraphy flourish. The envelope alone could have paid a water bill. I placed it on my counter and watched it for a week, the way you watch a stray cat decide whether it lives on your porch now. Evan called. "Just come," he said, his voice soft, with the part of him that still believed Tuesday could be Christmas if you set the table right. It could be good. Reset, you know? Reset. There was a word I knew too well. The button everyone presses when the accumulated truth starts to smoke. I said yes against the counsel of the better angels and the better spreadsheets. I told myself it was data collection. Humans are good at lying to themselves when they want to be loved. I bought a mid-priced bottle of wine, the nice kind that says, "I value you," not the extravagant kind that says, "Take more." I drove to their new house, the one built by an algorithm that calculates aspirational as angles and beige, and parked between two trucks that had never visited a job site. Inside, the stage was set with precision. Brenda, incandescent in a dress the color of gratitude. Arthur, already 3 stories into his favorite role. Patriarch with a front row seat to his own redemption arc. Cousins who hadn't texted in a year hugged like we survived a shipwreck together. The living room gleamed with showroom tags tucked under cushions. The kitchen islands boasted appliances that would never learn their own capabilities. When Arthur introduced me to a circle of men as our family's data genius, I smiled for the photo, and in the flash, my body remembered carrying that astronomy textbook under my pillow. You can be both proud of yourself and wary of what your pride attracts. That is adulthood. That is the science of staying whole. After dinner, Arthur clapped his hands and put on his most endearing panic. The slideshow, the baby pictures, the old laptop, the Wi-Fi. "You're the only one who can fix it, sweetheart." The words hung in the air like a net cast by a fisherman who knows the tide. Memory is a powerful bait. We think we're saving the past when we're really being drafted into repeating it. I followed him down the hall. The laptop sat there like a kind old dog. Dust, an outdated driver, a whirring fan that sounded like a plea. I did what I always do with machines. I listened. I logged in. I authenticated. My fingers remembered the codes I had written for my own safety and delivered them like gifts. None of us thinks we're the kind of person who will step into the same trap, even when we can describe the trap in detail. But that's how the best cons work. Not by outsmarting you, by inviting your better self to help. I pressed enter, watched the bar crawl forward, and told myself a story about being useful. In the morning, the model would collapse into one number, $97. 97. But in that moment, all I could hear was the sound of a room full of people, waiting to watch themselves being loved on a wall. A sentimental audience is a generous judge. I fixed the slideshow. I carried the laptop like a trophy out to the applause. I kissed Brenda's cheek. I told myself nothing had been taken from me that night. At 7 a.m., my phone taught me otherwise. And by 7:03, I remembered the difference between love and access. One you give, the other you guard. My life's work depended on knowing which was which. The night of my mother's 50th moved like a well-rehearsed play. No pauses, no dropped lines, just cues snapping into place. With the confidence of habit, Brenda glowed in sequins the color of champagne. Arthur wore a jacket he couldn't afford and a grin he could. Every room had a job. The foyer was for reception and reassurances. "You look amazing, Brenda. You know our daughter runs a company now?" The kitchen was for choreography and sweetness. Cobbler cooling, a roast resting, 4 hands arranging what 2 wallets couldn't reasonably supply. The living room was the stage, new sectional, tags tucked like secrets, a television so wide it felt like a window into someone else's life. The house itself told the story I should have heard. Particle board dressed as prosperity. Fixtures that wanted to be heirlooms. Beige that believed itself to be taste. It was a home built by aspiration, financed by narrative. Everyone played their part. Cousins took selfies with me because my job title looked good in captions. Neighbors shook Arthur's hand like he was responsible for every line of code I'd ever written. I watched and I smiled, and I told myself I was witnessing a harmless ritual of pride. The way parents borrow their children's shine, the way children once borrowed their parents' last name. During dessert, the room leaned into sentimentality like a ship toward shore. Arthur clapped twice. "Okay, folks, time to make Brenda cry." Laughter. He lifted the old family laptop like a chalice, face arranged into that charming panic he weaponizes so expertly. "The slideshow," he said, holding it slightly tilted, as if sorrow made objects heavier. "All the baby photos, the anniversaries, it's frozen." And he turned to me with eyes wide in practiced appeal. "Our in-house tech wizard is here. Sweetheart, can you?" A collective awe rose like steam from a kettle. It was brilliant social engineering. Not sophisticated the way a patent is sophisticated. Sophisticated the way a con is. He had chosen the moment when refusing would brand me unfeeling. He'd chosen the object that carried our memories like incense. He'd chosen an audience primed to applaud the rescue. Declining would be cruelty. Saying yes would be love. He handed me the machine, and nostalgia did the rest. In the office, the laptop waited on the desk like an obedient dog. Dust along the hinge, sticky keycaps, a whirring fan that sounded like fatigue. I powered it, watched the cursor hang on a spinning circle as if it were thinking hard on behalf of the past. "It can't see the network," I called to Arthur over my shoulder. "Probably a corrupt driver." He hovered in the doorway, nodding with the solemnity of someone who likes to be present for miracles. "Do what you need to do," he said, voice soft as a benediction, then withdrew. I did what I always do with machines. I listened first. Device manager, network adapters, the ugly red exclamation mark that tells you a small piece of software has forgotten who it is. I downloaded a clean driver, or tried to. The browser wouldn't load vendor pages from an unsecured connection. That part was normal for a machine this old. So I did what a million competent people do in a million family homes every day. I used my credentials to route around the rot. I logged into my personal email to retrieve a license key for a trusted utility. I authenticated via my 2FA app, thumbprint, code, done. I opened my company's cloud drive to pull a network tool we built in-house for diagnostics. ACLs allowed it. We grant that access to our laptops in case of travel. I typed my password. I saw the familiar push notification on my phone, approve. And over the noise of family chatter bleeding through the door, I tapped approve. It felt like competence. It felt like love. It was neither. If you've never seen a keylogger, imagine a shadow that learns your hands. Some are laughably loud. full screen warnings, and bundled malware teenagers can spot at a glance. Some are quiet. They live in the registry like a barnacle, bury a hook at the kernel level to catch keystrokes as they're born, take screenshots on triggers when you type pass or open a banking site, compress the data and exhale it to a waiting mailbox or server. They insist on persistence. They reinstall after reboot. They cloak the process name as something boring enough to ignore. Audio helper, printers VC, service host 32. I did not look for it because I did not know to look for it in my parents' house. That sentence is the hinge the whole night swings on. The slideshow extracted from old backups in a directory called Pictures 1992 Day. It plodded along until the images appeared, shaggy at the edges, like memories wearing clothes one size too big. I fixed the driver, tested the Wi-Fi, made sure the display mirrored to the big TV. The slideshow's preview played the life it claimed to honor. A little girl with icing on her cheeks, a mother dancing in a kitchen that didn't yet know the names of deferred bills, a father whose smile was pure joy when joy was cheap. I carried the laptop to the living room and lifted it like a trophy because that's what everyone wanted it to be. I plugged in the HDMI cable. The room sighed when the first photo filled the screen. Brenda pressed her fingers to her mouth. Arthur wiped a tear that might have been real. I stood to the side and let the past do its warm work. People clapped for memory, and by clapping, unwittingly signed an affidavit for the crime it hid. In the guest room later, I fell asleep, still clothed, my phone face up, the soft confidence of having solved a problem, glowing like a small nightlight. At 7:00 a.m., the phone began its seizure. Not a single buzz, but a series, insistent, organized, merciless. I blinked awake, the white ceiling resolving into the faint outlines of glow-in-the-dark stars I stuck there as a child. Alerts stacked. I thumbed open the banking app. The logo greeted me like a friend who had driven me home. The balance did not. 97 of in 97s. The previous morning, $92,000. Grief has a taste, and it is metal. I closed the app as if mercy lived behind the icon. I reopened. Numbers do not change because you beg them to. I scrolled transaction history the way people read bad news, looking for the sentence that will commute the sentence. 8 transfers between 2:04 a.m. and 3:58 a.m. Amounts sliced to avoid single approval thresholds, but large enough to matter, each to a new recipient account, with names that sounded invented by someone who didn't know the people they were pretending to be. The app logged the devices. One was Allara Pixel, my phone. The other registered only as unknown. Location, Austin, Texas. Flag, approved. 2-factor, passed. When I called the bank, my hands shook in a way that made me put the phone on speaker and lay it on the desk so I could take notes, hold music, scripted empathy. A voice, calm as the inside of a refrigerator. Yes, Ms. Allara, we're seeing 8 wires initiated from your business account overnight. I said the sentence that splits a life in two. I did not authorize those. Typing. A short, practiced pause. They were initiated with your correct credentials and approved by the 2FA app on your device. The IP geolocation matches your current address. There's a special kind of cruelty in language that's true but not complete. She was not wrong. She was not useful. I thanked her because women are taught to, and ended the call. I stared at the old laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document like a small heartbeat. I opened Event Viewer and looked at logs that smelled of tampering. Install events in the hour before the party. Scheduled tasks with names meant to bore a mind in panic. I took screenshots. I pulled the system's list of recent executables and watched lines resolve into a grammar of theft. I checked my email login security page and saw a new device listed around 9:43 p.m. Windows, Austin, TX. I opened my company's admin console and forced a global sign-out on all sessions, reset my passwords using a separate device, revoked the app authorization for the diagnostic tool I had pulled last night. I did it methodically, like I was on the clock in a lab that could not afford a second spill. Down the hall, a spatula clicked against a skillet. Someone laughed. A radio ad promised 0% APR for buyers with approved credit. It's astonishing how ordinary the soundtrack of a felony can be. I packed my laptop. I coiled the charger. I checked the time, 7:19. I thought of the slideshow blinking. Through images of a childhood that had just been repossessed, I felt nausea rise, then settle into something colder. Here's what clarity feels like. A chair you thought was too hard turning out to be exactly the right shape for your back. I didn't storm the kitchen. I didn't hurl accusations like plates. The performance was set, and they had rehearsed their lines longer than I'd been alive. I would not audition for a part I no longer wanted. On my way out, the house looked taller, ridiculous, like a suit 2 sizes too big on a skinny man. The morning light caught the smudges you can't see by chandelier. The front door clicked behind me with a sound I hope someday to forget. In the car, I opened notes and typed a new file name, Incident YIMD. I listed the transfers. I listed the timestamps. I listed the device IDs and the IP. I wrote, keylogger suspected. I wrote, evidence preserved. I wrote a sentence that surprised me in its steadiness. Do not argue. Build the case. The trap wasn't the keylogger. The trap was the theater it hid inside. The bait wasn't the laptop. The bait was love. And in that traffic-drowsy minute, with the Texas sun burning a low white line across the windshield, I understood the next move would decide which life I lived from now on. The old one where I bled on the kitchen floor and called it duty, or the new one where I listened to the data and called it truth. I put the car in drive. The numbers would not save themselves. The story, if told in the right order, might. Panic is loud, precision is quiet. After I drove to the end of their street and pulled under a pecan tree in a strip of shade that belonged to no one, I let the noise drain out. The jitter in my hands subsided into a steadiness that felt almost like muscle memory. I had written incident runbooks for servers we couldn't afford to let fail. Now I wrote one for my life. Step 1, contain. Step 2, assess blast radius. Step 3, escalate to the right adults in the room. I had spent 15 years trying to convince myself my parents were those adults. I finally admitted they were the fire. I called Evan first because I needed a control variable, someone close enough to know, distant enough not to have fingerprints on the thing. He answered groggy, voice sanded with sleep. "What's up?" I asked, careful, as if the question were a scalpel. Did Mom and Dad say anything about coming into money? A pause stretched, rubber band tight. "Yeah," he said slowly, waking up inside the sentence. Dad's been talking all week about some big deal closing. He said we should hold off on bills because an infusion was coming. The word infusion landed like a cheap curtain pulled across a broken window. I told him the number, 92,000. He swore, soft, stunned, like the first time a kid cuts his palm on glass. I didn't know, he said. I swear, Al. I believed him. People who know your passwords don't call you at 10 p.m. to ask what brand of cake to buy. I hung up and dialed the only person in our family who didn't confuse loyalty with silence. Aunt Valerie answered on the second ring. Sunday clipped the edges of her tone, but logic filled the middle. Ara, she said. She's one of the only people who still shortens my name. You okay? No, I said plainly, and heard my own voice like a report read into the record. Arthur and Brenda took $92,000 from my business account last night. It was a keylogger on the old laptop. There was no gasp. Valerie's breath hitched and then smoothed. An accountant settling into the chair where she performs small miracles with columns. Where are you? She asked. A diner off Highway 71, the one with the blue sign. Good, she said. Don't call them, don't text them. Keep the laptop on battery until I get there. Order coffee. Don't cry in public. You can do it later. This is not a family dispute. It's felony wire fraud. I'm bringing a lawyer. The diner smelled like bacon and bleach, and the kind of coffee that scours your enamel. I took a booth by a window, the laptop beside me, like a sleeping animal I didn't dare wake. Valerie arrived in 10 minutes, hair in a knot, no makeup. The power of a woman who doesn't need adornment to do her job. With her came Hannah, a cyber fraud attorney whose handshake was dry and decisive. Hannah sat, unfolded a legal pad, and made the table feel like a triage bay. Walk me through the chain of events, she said, pen poised. I recounted the night, the laptop, the driver, the 2FA prompts, the timing of the transfers. She didn't interrupt with sympathy. She interrupted with better questions. Which tools did you authenticate to? What IP did the bank log? Where is the laptop now? Who else had physical access between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m.? Valerie slid her phone across the table, the camera app open. Start photographing everything, she said. Event logs, scheduled tasks, services, anything that looks like persistence. We'll image the drive later. For now, preserve. I popped open the laptop and worked as if the hinge were a detonator. Screenshots, timestamps, a text document titled Evidence, dates, and a running clock in the header. Windows Event Viewer showed an install at 8:51 p.m., a driver that had no business being there. A scheduled task named Audio Helper 32 invoked every 30 seconds, too chatty for its supposed job. A registry entry pointing to an executable buried in a directory that promised to be about printing. Hannah nodded, the way a surgeon nods when the imaging confirms what the instinct already knew. This is clean in the worst way, she said. It's planned, it's persistent, and it rides your keystrokes all the way to your vault. We drove from the diner to a small office downtown with blinds that tilted like they kept secrets. Hannah's paralegal, a calm person named Rima, took custody of the laptop, gloved and careful, logging the chain of evidence with the ceremony such theft deserves. On Hannah's advice, I filed a police report with Travis County, crisp and dry as an affidavit should be. Facts only. Times, devices, IPs, amounts. I submitted a sworn statement, left fingerprints, signed my name until my hand cramped into a claw. Valerie made calls between calls. Her bank, her brokerage, the compliance officer, she'd charmed into becoming a friend after spotting a reconciliation error once. Freeze any new accounts we can link to Arthur, she told people in controlled tones. Flag transactions with these amounts. Watch for cash outs at branches within 20 miles. Her competence was a life raft. I climbed onto it and let my lungs relearn air. The bank moved faster when a law office called with a police report number and the phrase felony wire fraud. They froze what remained. About $12,000 dribbled into a destination account that hadn't yet found the exit door. But money moves like water and shame moves like fire, and most of it had already disappeared into routes we couldn't trace without subpoenas. Hannah filed for an emergency injunction. We'll likely get a court order to seize the device and compel disclosure, she said, flipping pages like she was counting coup. We'll also trigger a hold on their accounts to prevent further dissipation. You'll probably see texts from them soon. Ignore them. If they call you cruel, take it as confirmation you're walking the correct direction. They didn't disappoint. Brenda texted an hour later. You left without saying goodbye. That was very rude. Your father is worried. Worried. What an exquisitely chosen word when apology is unavailable. I didn't respond. At noon, Arthur sent a paragraph that tried to wear 4 outfits at once. Paternal, managerial, scolding, affectionate. You're overreacting, kiddo. You're going to ruin a big opportunity for this family. Call me now. The refrain again. The family as a company whose dividend I had stolen by defending myself. I muted the thread and forwarded the messages to Hannah. She added them to a folder labeled Exhibits. That afternoon, the story bent in a way I didn't see coming. Valerie, terror-seated by what Arthur had done to me, ran a forensic sweep of her own finances. She had always kept walls he couldn't climb, indexes, conservative funds, a boring basket that grew like a slow vine. But she'd let him advise a carved-out portion, because blood talks, because sons sell charisma to sisters by the ounce, because even rationalists have soft spots. At 7 p.m., she called me from her kitchen table. He lost it, she said, and the words emptied a room in my chest. All of it, 300,000 over the last year. The air changed temperature. He was trying to patch my hole with your water, she said, voice breaking into anger's shard. The math rearranged its face. My 92 wasn't venture capital. It was an attempted cover-up, the clumsiest Ponzi in the world, robbing a daughter to stall the truth with a sister. Behind me, Hannah exhaled a professional profanity and pulled another set of forms. That adds elder financial abuse to the list, she said. It will matter in court. We planned the confrontation like an operation. Not for theater, for containment. Tuesday morning, we would go to the house with the laptop still in our chain of custody bag, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy and the authority of paper. Valerie would come, the wronged sister whose ledger had been set on fire by a man who refused to learn subtraction. The aim was not catharsis, it was compliance. We wanted the device formally collected, the admission accidentally spoken, the stage reset from kitchen drama to legal proceeding. The morning came. The sky over East Austin was the color of a reset screen. In my car's passenger seat, Hannah closed her portfolio with the deliberateness of someone sheathing a blade. In the rearview mirror, Valerie's face was stone, no mascara to smudge, no softness to weaponize. A patrol car idled a house length down, not lights blazing, just presence like a spine. I thought about how many times I had rehearsed a different scene in my head. The plea, the apology, the mutual cry, the promise of change that tricks holidays into hope. That script had saved them, never me. This one was mine. Before we rang the bell, Hannah looked at me. "Remember," she said, "do not argue. Ask, state, document. If they emote, let them. Emotions aren't evidence. Data is." I nodded, the advice slotting into every system I had ever trusted. My hand didn't shake when I pressed the button. The chime sounded rich and false in a house financed by lies. Arthur opened the door, smile already halfway to his eyes. It would slide off soon enough, but in that second I cataloged him the way I catalog errors in a model before I fix them. Origin, pattern, cost. In the last 48 hours, I had learned something no spreadsheet had taught me. Justice is not loud. It arrives in forms and timestamps, in signatures and custody logs, in a deputy's knock that echoes longer than a father's laugh. And if you're very lucky, it arrives in the hands of the aunt who refused to sell her future for a story. I glanced at Valerie. She nodded once. The door opened wider. The case began. Arthur's smile collapsed in stages, like scaffolding taken down by a wind no one forecast. He was still halfway into the greeting he'd rehearsed. "We were so worried when Hannah stepped forward and introduced herself the way a gavel introduces a courtroom, by ending the previous conversation. "Hannah Ortiz, counsel for Ms. Allara," she said, crisp, professional, an edge honed by 100 rooms like this. "We're here to recover evidence tied to felony wire fraud and to serve a formal demand for the immediate return of $92,000, wired from Kepler Data's account overnight." Behind her, I saw the Travis County deputy approach along the walk, hat under his elbow, body language that communicated the law's most unnerving quality, patience. Brenda appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel the color of denial. The towel stopped midair when she saw Valerie on the porch, the sister-in-law who doesn't scare, the ledger in human form. "Val," she said, the nickname wobbling, unsure whether it still belonged to her mouth. Valerie did not answer. She crossed the threshold with the chill of affront that changes a season. We moved into the living room. The new furniture held us like a polite stranger, attractive, unbroken, unearned. Arthur tried for the tone that had worked on crowds and creditors and children. "Okay," he said with a practiced chuckle. "Clearly feelings are high. We can talk like family. No need to." Hannah opened her portfolio. "There will be no discussion of family, Mr. Arthur, until the funds are returned and devices surrendered. Here is the demand letter." She placed it on the coffee table as if demonstrating gravity to a man who claimed not to believe in it. "Here is a copy of the police report." Another document. "And here are the exhibits, screenshots of the keylogged sessions and the wire confirmations." She didn't look angry. Anger is inefficient. She looked inevitable. Brenda recovered first, performing indignation like a hymn she'd known since childhood. "After everything we've done for you," she began. "Ma'am," the deputy said gently from the doorway, "we're here about a specific incident." We'll need the laptop referred to in the report. Brenda blinked at the badge, the way people blink at bright facts. Laptop? She echoed, as if the word had just been invented. Arthur pivoted to me like an attorney who had mistaken his audience for a jury that still liked him. It was a loan, he said, a simple family loan. The money was sitting there, and we had an opportunity. You'll get it back with interest. He spread his hands, palms up, a gesture that had once meant open-heartedness, and now read like a magician, showing you the emptiness of his sleeves after he's already palmed the coin. Hannah didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Correction. The funds were obtained through felony wire fraud after you installed a keylogger on a computer you knew your daughter would use, captured her credentials and two-factor approvals, and initiated 8 transfers from 2:04 a.m. to 3:58 a.m. to accounts under your control or influence. She turned a page. We have file system artifacts of persistence, scheduled tasks, and registry entries pointing to your install. We have IP logs, device IDs, and bank confirmations. We have the chain of custody log for the laptop your daughter removed from this home after discovery. She looked toward the deputy. He nodded once, a promise of paperwork, not mercy. Arthur's face drained to a sickly color that made the tan look like paint. That's a lie, he said, but his mouth had lost the muscle memory for persuasion. You can't prove. Valerie cut him off with a sentence honed over a lifetime of proofs. Was mine a loan too? She asked, voice level enough to slice ice. The room lost air. Arthur flinched, a small, involuntary movement that confessed before words could. $300,000, Valerie continued, each syllable an addition problem solved out loud. My retirement, the portion you insisted you could supercharge, because you had an in on a tech venture. Gone. Over the last year, were you planning to pay that back? With your daughter's seed fund and call it love? Brenda turned to Arthur so fast the towel fell like a white flag. 300 what? The number detonated in the room. You could hear the math trying to assemble, the mortgage, the furniture, the payments they'd held off, because an infusion was coming. Arthur, she said again, the second time a plea looking for a lie it could survive. He searched her face for the script, found none, and looked older than I'd ever seen him, as if every postponement of truth had finally found its due date. The deputy stepped forward. Sir, we have a warrant to seize the laptop described in the report for forensic analysis, he said, courteous in the way only authority can afford to be. We'll also ask you not to access any of the accounts specified in this order while the investigation proceeds. Valerie pointed at the office. Desk, second drawer, she said, because she'd watched Arthur hide evidence since he was 12 and stole quarters from their mother's coffee can. The deputy retrieved the machine, bagged it, labeled it, and the zipper sound across plastic felt like a zipper sealing a body bag. Dramatic, yes, but accurate for what died in that moment. The myth that this would never come to a door with a badge attached. Arthur tried one more mask. You'll ruin this family, he told me, low and hoarse, as if secrets were a kind of intimacy he could still claim. I looked at him and said the truest sentence I had. You already did, I said. We're here to count the damage. The kitchen clock ticked. The house suddenly sounded cheap. The The rest proceeded, like bureaucracy often does when it's working, slowly, then all at once. Hannah filed an emergency motion for an injunction, the judge reading words like keylogger, 2FA, elder financial abuse, and ongoing dissipation of assets, granted it before lunch. Accounts paused mid-breath. Statements arrived that looked, in the aggregate, like a confession typed by numbers. Arthur's story buckled under the weight of data. He could not explain away timestamps. He could not turn scheduled tasks into sentiment. He had no case except the oldest one, that we owed him forgiveness because we shared a last name. The district attorney filed 2 charges, felony wire fraud, tied to my case, and theft with special circumstances, related to Valerie's retirement. Elder financial abuse statutes sharpen penalties, not because age makes money more worthy, but because time makes recovery more expensive. Arthur's public bravado evaporated in private consults with a lawyer who did not care about his barbecue charm. He took a plea to avoid a trial that would have stapled his worst habits to public record. Sentencing was not cinematic. It was administrative. 5 years probation, mandatory financial counseling, restitution orders that had the personality of a calculator and the force of the state. Because the accounts were messy and the house was the only asset with enough equity to matter, the court ordered a sale, an immediate listing, proceeds held in escrow, distributions to satisfy judgments. My $92,000 first, Valerie's remaining balance next. Watching an agent's for sale sign impale the front lawn felt less like revenge and more like physics. Action, reaction, balance restored by a mechanism none of us could charm. Family systems don't break quietly. They hiss and clatter and then pretend nothing happened. Word spread down the line in texts that began with, "Have you heard?" and ended with silence when I replied with the docket number. There were opinion pieces disguised as concern. Couldn't this have stayed private? Blood is thicker, he's under pressure. I did not argue. I forwarded screenshots to a folder. You cannot litigate your life in a group chat. You can only choose which invitations to decline. Evan packed a single duffel, left his keys on the kitchen counter, and knocked on my apartment door with eyes that had learned a lesson he'd tried not to need. "Couch?" he asked. "Of course," I said, and handed him a blanket and the Wi-Fi password and a list of groceries written like a welcome. He apologized for things that weren't his fault. I told him a fact. We were allowed to build a different house from the one we were born in. A week after sentencing, a letter arrived on Kepler letterhead I didn't recognize until I saw the return address, the County Corrections Office. "Court-mandated apology," Hannah said when I texted her a photo. "File it with the rest." I read it once, 2 pages of nouns in search of accountability. I made a mistake. I overextended. I borrowed. He did not write "I stole" because that word turns a man into a mirror he can't stand. The last line did what he'd always done, wrapped harm in the ribbon of family. Everything I did for us. I put the letter in a folder called Closed. You can love people and decline their diagnosis of your boundaries. On the day the moving truck came for the big beige life, I drove by, on my way to the office. The curtains were open and the rooms looked raw without their costume. A neighbor waved at the deputy standing watch over a process that had become, by then, ordinary. I did not feel triumph. I felt a calibration click into place, the way a level bubble floats to true after too many years of lean. We didn't speak of Arthur or Brenda after that. Not because we were pretending to forget, but because some words don't belong in new rooms. There were bills to pay, and a beta to launch, and a brother to teach how to write SQL that didn't melt under load. Valerie and I met on Tuesdays to reconcile ledgers at a coffee shop with good light and staff who had come to know our names without needing to know our history. We built a family out of consent instead of obligation. We enforced rules written in ink we could both see. People imagine justice as thunder. Often it's a stamp and a spreadsheet and a knock on a door delivered by a man who says ma'am and means it. Often it's the quiet relief of not being crazy anymore. Often it's just the absence of theater, the silence that remains when you refuse to audition for roles that require you to bleed for applause. When the house finally sold and the escrow dispersed, the wire notification hit my phone at 9:17 a.m. The number was not a miracle. It was a return to baseline. I took a breath that went all the way down. In the office that afternoon, I wrote a new runbook and taped it inside the finance cabinet. Title, Family. Step 1, Love freely. Step 2, Lend never. Step 3, if they insist that access equals love, reread Step 2. Then get coffee with your CFO aunt and ship the next release. 1 year later, the office doesn't look like triumph. It looks like work. Whiteboards layered in hand-drawn orbits and erased constraints. A rubber plant that keeps living despite our collective forgetfulness. Desks with water rings from late nights and a corkboard crowded with beta feedback, printed in 12-point font. Every line a person trusting us with their cash flow cliff. If you visited at 8:42 a.m., you'd find me at the far table with a mug I don't let anyone wash, because the coffee patina feels like a promise kept to myself. On the glass wall behind me, written in thick marker, there's a phrase Valerie made me leave up. No runway without receipts. It's not poetry, it's our religion. Kepler Data didn't arrive like a rocket. It arrived like careful gravity. An orbit earned one equation at a time. The $92,000 that vanished and returned isn't a plot twist anymore. It's a line item. My angels stayed. They saw the police report and the injunctions and the house sale scribbled across docket numbers and told me the thing I didn't know I needed to hear. If you can steer through that weather, you can steer through a market. We closed a larger round 6 months ago with people who ask about metrics, not miracles. When I send updates, they don't want polished decks. They want live dashboards and ugly truths. I give them both. The trust works both ways, or it doesn't work at all. Valerie sits in the glass office 2 doors down. CFO 3 letters that look small until you see what they hold. She builds models with the elegance she once reserved for reconciliations no one else could untangle. She negotiated with a vendor last week in a tone I recognized from childhood. The one that says, I will say this once, and once is enough. She keeps our burn tight and our options open. On the day our first customer sent a note, "Your forecast saved my bakery," she printed it, framed it, and hung it above our accounts receivable board like a new kind of family portrait. There's no gold leaf, just ink and a thumbtack. It shines anyway. Evan is our community coordinator and part-time apprentice developer. He still keeps his guitar in the corner, and sometimes, after we ship a build, he strums 3 quiet chords before shutting down his machine. He learns SQL like someone learning a new alphabet to write letters home. He's patient with users who write in all caps because the internet taught them that's how you matter. When we hire, he asks candidates about boundaries before we ask them about skills. Can you say no when yes will break you? He'll say, and the right people grin like he just said the secret out loud. We don't hire people who audition for sacrifice. We hire people who know how to build without bleeding. We don't talk about Arthur or Brenda at work. Not because it hurts, it does, but that's not why. We don't talk about them because their names don't belong in this room. This is a place made from consent, not obligation. The closest we get are the runbooks taped to the inside of the finance cabinet. Incident, compromised credentials, family. The last one is new. It reads, in Valerie's tidy block script, love freely, lend never. If someone tells you access is proof of love, reread line 2. Then make tea. It's both policy and lullaby. I didn't know you could write both in the same stanza until she did it. On Tuesday nights, we hold open ledger hours. Not mandatory, not performative. Just an hour where anyone can ask how money moves through our system. The interns come with questions that would have gotten me mocked at my first job. Where does interest hide? Why do net 30 invoices feel like a trap? We answer without smirking, because secrecy is how rot grows. The more we name, the less we lose. That's the entire thesis of Kepler, scaled to a human room. Some days I think about the versions of family we were sold. Blood as ballast, forgiveness as duty. Be the bigger person as a blanket phrase that always meant make yourself smaller to keep the peace. Then I look at this quiet office and see a different blueprint. You pick your people the way you pick a cosigner, cautiously, with evidence, and with a plan for when the weather turns. You measure love by how someone honors your no, not how eloquently they extract your yes. You build traditions you can afford. You write apologies that use the right verbs. You don't pawn star charts for gas money. You replace the missing book with a telescope and a key that only you control. I keep the court-mandated apology in a file labeled closed, not out of spite, out of hygiene. I read it once when it arrived and learned what I needed to learn. Some people would rather rename harm than stop committing it. It's a diagnosis that has nothing to do with me. Therapy taught me a sentence I now carry like a pocket tool. I am allowed to end a story without finding a better ending for the other characters. Boundaries aren't verdicts, they're building codes. You follow them, or the roof falls on everyone. If you need the documentary version of what happened, charges filed, plea taken, probation set, restitution enforced, equity extracted from a house that pretended to be wealth until mathematics spoke. But the documentary misses what really mattered. The moment in the car when I wrote, "Do not argue, build the case." The moment in the foyer when Hannah's voice turned the volume down on 50 years of kitchen theater. The morning we hung the bakery note above accounts receivable and decided that's what we chase now. Specific people saved from specific cliffs, because we were stubborn enough to do the boring parts well. There are still flashbacks, the shape of the old laptop when I see a device that looks too friendly. The way hold music can make my pulse climb. When that happens, I run the checklist I made for myself the week after sentencing. Sleep, water, call Valerie, write it down, ship a small thing. The world will try to teach you that healing is grand. It isn't. It's a collection of small, competent acts, done when no one is applauding. I'm supposed to end with a lesson. The internet requires it, the way courts require signatures. Here's mine, and I give it to you without polish. Blood doesn't absolve harm. Blood explains access. The people who keep you safe are the people who respect the locks you install. Generosity without discernment is just a slow loan to chaos. Cutting ties is not cruelty. It is the engineering of a bridge you can finally cross without watching the water below for the body of your younger self. And if you're the one who needs permission, you have it. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. The myth that says you are, burn it. Use the light to read your ledger clearly. To the person listening who recognized their own kitchen in mine, who tastes metal when their phone buzzes, who is doing the math alone at a booth in a diner that smells like bleach. You are not crazy. Take screenshots. Preserve the timeline. Find the aunt or the friend or the lawyer or the stranger with a badge who will speak the language of facts when your heart is speaking flood. There is a road out. It is not lit with speeches. It is paved with forms, and you can walk it. Now, if this story steadied your hands or helped you name a pattern you were trained not to see, thank you for spending this time with me. I wish you good health and a home where the locks are chosen by you and honored by everyone invited inside. I wish your family, by blood or by choice, quiet mornings, solvable problems, and apologies that use the right verbs. If you want more stories about breaking cycles and building something honest in their place, subscribe and stay with us. We're not done mapping this sky. There is so much left to chart, and I promise to tell you the truth about each star we name. Thank you for listening. May you and your family be safe, well, and happy.